All right, let's get started on what will be our first bi-weekly data discussion um, meeting. No, let's not say meeting. Let's say like extravaganza of this guaranteed three work. That's like if we're just gonna do it haphazardly and not really enthusiastically, then let's not do it at all. Um, we're gonna focus our time between now and what is it, March 23rd? I think is the date. Is to really focus on three F&P habits for Level J that students analyze words from left to right using knowledge of sound letter relationships, which is attached to standard RF 2.3. Second one is uses known words and word parts to figure out new words, which is attached to standard RF 2.3 as well. And lastly, that students reread when necessary to search for meaning and self-correct, which is attached to standard RF 2.4. So with that in mind, we're gonna really start by asking with some celebrations. So I would like to start with Ms. Mesa at the end. What have students mastered since the last time we met?
Well, what I observe them mastering is completely mastering the ability to analyze the words from left to right, so that they're not jumping around and skipping words, but they're not going forward until they meet that. They understand now that they're not, even if it gets difficult. And about 80%, I would say, is going back and making sure they reread it if it doesn't make sense. And that's a huge, instead of guessing and just going on and assuming, taking whatever. So that's huge for me. And that helps me to see that they're actually learning about that. That builds in the comprehension also. That tells me that they're actually starting to comprehend, wait a minute, that doesn't make sense. So that's not gonna work.
What are you doing with regards to that rereads standard? What are you doing instructionally to get to 80%?
So what I'm doing is, as we're reading, they'll say the word and I'll say, okay, what does that mean? Does that make sense? And and have them repeat it back to me so that I'm not allowing them to just speed and go through it. And even if they're reading it correctly, I make sure I'll ask them, what does that sentence mean? Or do you know what's happening? What did you just read? And really to dig deeper. So basically I'm tapping a lot into their understanding, more so than just that word call, that sight, that memorizing that we're all good at.
Good. Well, thank you for that.
You're very welcome.
Ms. Robinson, what have your students mastered since last we met?
I think my students have really mastered the fluency of reading accurately, as well as the self-correction seems to be lower, and students are taking the time to read sound out words rather than just guess at what they're saying or what they're reading, and hope that it's correct. So I'm seeing a lot of taking the time to read it and make sure that it's correct before I just say bamboo instead of bamboo, something like that. They're actually taking the time to read it and make sure that it's correct before we go on. So I'm seeing some students are really slowing down, which in my instruction is always don't go so fast. It's not necessary. There's nobody here but me and you anyway. So take your time and read it.
What are you doing? Just that prompt with regard to making them slow down. Like, what are some things that you're doing or modeling?
Well, you know what, it's one of the curriculum that we use, the Every Child a Writer, and what I'm doing in that is, for example, we might have the prompt is something like a fire truck. So tell me about the fire truck, and they'll say, it has 4 windows, and I say, okay, we'll write that down, and they'll start to write. And what they say, it's easy to say, but it's very difficult. I shouldn't say very difficult. It's harder for some than others to actually write those words down. And then when you write it, is that what you wrote? Because that doesn't look like 4 windows. That looks like a T, a F. What's happening here? So that's the part that when you get to, when you ask the question, what are you doing? I'm working with them directly on stuff that is applicable to what we're doing in class, and honestly, real world things. So you see a fire truck and it's red with hose. How do you spell hose? When you wrote that, if that's one of the descriptors that we have, how do you spell that and use it in a sentence? slow down and write it.
Gotcha. And that's applying to what you're seeing in reading as well?
Yes.
Thank you. Mr. Hughes, what have your students mastered since last we met?
I think that analyzes words from left to right is something that I'm seeing kids using a lot better. I'm not sure that I'd say completely mastered, but they're doing it better.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that stems from some of the work that we did with the BLAST, with sounding out words with using the phonemes from the beginning to the end of those words.
Mm-hmm.
And then, so as we've been reading in small groups, when a kid gets stuck on a word, I've been having them use like the fingers to count out those phonemes and sound out those phonemes in the word that they're reading,
Mm-hmm.
to try to kind of connect what they've been doing with the BLAST stuff to being able to use that in a text as well.
Mm-hmm.
So if they're struggling with the word last, they know that L makes the L, last,
Mm-hmm.
so that they're working on sounding that out from the left to the right and thinking about all the different sounds that they're hearing in that word.
Good. Okay, so we're all seeing some success rates overall. That's good. That's kind of what I saw when I looked at your running records. So right now, the rest of our time is really about getting down to some specific skill. The way that I've phrased it on your think sheet is which skill needs to be urgently addressed to reach our goal. And that's how I want to think about it, but I want to say it a different way right now to make sure I'm really clear about what we're trying to do with our bi-weekly data meeting work. Another way of talking about number 2 is, what are all of these kids going to master 2 weeks from now? What's the thing we're going to make sure that these kids have mastered the next time we get together? So with that being said, let's start with Frank and go back the other way. What did you identify as a skill that needs to be urgently addressed for your kids?
One thing I did notice in the running records is accuracy improved, but I still didn't see much self-correction happening. So I think the thing that I urgently need to address is to make sure that students are rereading, are rereading when necessary to search for meaning and self-corrects.
Mm-hmm.
And I have done some instruction around that already, but I'm not seeing them using that independently. And I've tried to implement some practice where students can work with a partner and they're working on specifically going back to self-correct.
Mm-hmm.
And if a partner notices that they read something that didn't sound right or that didn't make sense, that they'll tap them on the shoulder and then point to the spot where they heard them make that mistake,
Mm-hmm.
so that they're sort of having some accountability with a partner.
Mm-hmm.
And the one other thing that I did notice is, and it doesn't necessarily fit with, or I couldn't figure out how it fit with one of the 3 standards, but I did notice that a lot of students were struggling by either adding end sounds that weren't there, like making it plural, or forgetting an end sound if it was plural and like leaving that off.
Mm-hmm.
So like I noticed like adding an S or not adding an S at the end, or that was sort of a big issue. So I think that I also need to address somehow, maybe with the sounding right, or thinking about it in syntax, the syntax of the sentence, does it sound right if it's plural or not plural?
Mm-hmm.
And I think that could kind of go back to that same thing about self-correcting, when it, not just when it doesn't match the meaning, but when it doesn't sound right as well.
Thank you for that. Ms. Robinson.
The skill that I felt really we needed to work on based on the, what do you call those things, it's gone now.
Running records?
running records,
Mhm.
based on the running.
Welcome.
Based on the running records, is comprehension.
Mhm.
That is one thing that I think that I have students, not just this group, but I have students that can read all day long.
Mhm.
And they can get up to the M's and the N's, but if I ask them, what did you just read about? They have no idea.
Mhm.
And based on some of the answers that I saw in this, the comprehension is something that I really wanna work on with the students, and thinking about the questions and whether the answer choice makes sense based on the question, and also, do you even understand the question?
Mhm.
So those
Thank you
is- you're
for
welcome.
that. I see a connection between what you and Frank just said, but I want to get to it in a little bit, although I think Mesa probably will. What did you notice?
So what I noticed is, they really need to work on the ability to recognize known word parts.
Mm-hmm.
Within, like, for example, they know car, you give them the word car and they know it.
Mm-hmm.
But if I take the AR and put it in another word, they'll miss it.
Mm-hmm.
And so that's important, and on my running records, it connects with it because a lot of visual. Pretty much all the errors were visual. They were able to go left to right, but they would look at the first sounds and then miss the middle. Or they'd skip the middle, and they kept doing that, and that was what I really noticed a lot, so that's what I came up with as a for sure thing.
Mm-hmm.
That's a hindrance, and that's like a door that's stopping them. Once they figure out to pay attention to the middle sounds also, and the ending sounds, then they're gonna go right through that door, so. And be able to understand what they're reading, cause if they're not getting what they read, yeah, it does connect.
Mm-hmm.
They're not gonna be able to, they're stopping where they,
Mm-hmm.
have a word floor, they know those sounds, they know all the alphabet sounds, but when it comes to those vowel teams and those different things, so that's an area where I need to target. What I'm gonna do is just go ahead and make sure, I don't know if you asked me, but the way I'm gonna reach this goal, I already have it in my brain. We were talking about using that blast material to meet the needs of our students without just following specifically the book, but what they need, so I'm thinking I'm gonna get words, I've already started, but I'm gonna continue to do words and with word parts that they're struggling with, and then I'm gonna have them have their boards and say it, build it, so they can literally see visually, and then I like to also use like real life, so I'll have the person stand up and they'll be the and then the vowel team will be someone, and then I'll get another word, and are you the same person? Yeah, well, the same sound, just things like that. Try to get creative with them, since my students struggle with the visual piece of it,
Gotcha.
so.